Good afternoon to everyone. I see some of us are still at lunch. I hope the rest of the group will quickly join us. I'm very happy this afternoon to introduce my panelists. I have Akash Poyam, who is founder of one of the founders of Adivasi Resurgence, online news domain of on Adivasi issues, and he's also with the Caravan magazine. There's also Christina, who is a co-founder of Dalit History Month and also works as a consultant in the corporate sector. Amitabh, of course, all of you know he's the CEO of Oxfam. And Sudipto has been a journalist for many years now and done path-breaking work in his field. Very good reporter, and he was with the Hindustan Times and is presently working on a book on the Rohit Vemula issue. I'll start by asking, before I go into my opening, after I finish my opening remarks, I'll ask each panelist I'll give them just 2 minutes to make their remarks. And after that, we'll go into a time of discussion. And we will have about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions and responses. So since, as you know, time is of the essence, we will keep to time. So it's been my privilege to work as a journalist. I started my career right here in Delhi after my Indian Institute of Management course. And I worked briefly with a magazine called Probe India and so on. So I'm one of the veterans now of journalism, print journalism. I've also done some work in TV. So I'd like to just give a brief overview of how journalism has a major role to play in the making of India. So if we look at the picture in the pre-independence struggle, the leaders were all having some kind of journalistic activity or the other. We know of Gandhi, who ran journals. Ambedkar himself had journals. They used their journalism to address their audience, speak to their constituents, and also gather support among the people. So it has had an important role, and it has been one of the foundational aspects of the freedom struggle. I would say that also, therefore, in a real sense, media is the fourth pillar of democracy. They say the fourth estate, I would say it's the fourth pillar of democracy in our country. And so the grand experiment that India was when it was just a new country, when it was a newborn nation state, with this vision of equality, fraternity, and liberty, it had an important aspect of free speech as well. Many court cases were fought on this issue. So then after that, we see that during the emergency period, if you recall, there was a lot of, that was a big issue. The suppression of freedom of press was a big issue of the country, and later on created a huge interest and resurgence in the press. But then, who was in the press, who was writing, who was talking to us, who was telling our stories? I think that was the big question that was looked at by Kenneth Cooper when he came in 1996 and conducted a study and discovered that there's hardly any Dalits in the newsroom. And then this report was carried by B.N. Unyal in the Pioneer. And 10 years later, another study was conducted in 2006. Between 1996 and 2006, 10 years, nothing had changed. And so therefore, it was in this context that people began to wonder about why there is no representation of some of the marginalized and vulnerable communities in the media in this country. And it was in this context that there have been a lot of debates. And in the year 2017, we had a meeting in Chennai of editors because of this concern that there needs to be diversity in the newsroom. And so I was also part of that. There was Sudipto who was part of it. There were many important journalists in the country. And so there was a dialogue about asking major news and media outlets to become more open to hiring, training people from diverse social backgrounds. There is a document called the Taramani Charter, but I will ask Sudipto to talk about it when he's there. And actually, I would like to then say that for the present day, it is the Rohit Vemula incident that created a huge burst and surge of interest. There was this sudden understanding that the Dalit issue has been quiet, silent, something is happening there, we need to report it. And there has been a huge interest on reporting on Dalit issues in the media since the Rohit Vemula incident. And therefore, in that context, the mainstream media has taken up. That doesn't mean, though, that Dalits and Adivasis haven't done their own bit. But you see, the question is, where is the money coming from? Where's the bottom line? So we have outfits like Dalit Dastak, Round Table India, Dalit Camera, Adivasi Resurgence, and there's a book publishing outfit known as Adivani, which publishes books by Adivasi women. So the communities themselves have invested their own resources, but where is the bottom line? I mean, the mainstream media and these are some of the key issues that we've talked about not only the lack of voice and space for individuals from the community in the mainstream. What about the autonomy? What about the funding? Where's the money coming from? These are some of the key issues we hope to be discussing. And we are grateful to Oxfam for having conducted this report and sort of put a mirror before the media at this point. And so now I will invite my panelists to make their opening statements.
Thank you. Seva Johar to everyone. It is really unfortunate that I have to begin, talking by mentioning that how this panel discussion does not feel welcoming, because it's ironical also that the very issue that we are planning to, that we hope to discuss about caste diversity or the lack of Adivasi journalists, is the title of the panel discussion is caste representation. The Oxfam report, which is released, unfortunately also does the same mistake and puts scheduled tribes into the category of marginalized caste groups. Now, this may seem like a small error or whatever, but for Adivasi communities, these representations have larger consequences, where for decades our identities have been homogenized into caste, while I, for example, belong to Koitur Gond community, and we are neither Hindus nor we are a caste. And the fact that our identities and the specificities of our communities and aspirations are never taken into account while using such languages itself is a reflection of what we are talking about, that there is a near absence of Adivasis. Now, this is also further problematic, because the way largely how Adivasi communities are perceived is shaped by these misrepresentations and distortions, where so far most of the national media and who have been telling the story of Adivasi communities have been done by non-Adivasi journalists. I want to mention that how even though the term primitive has been regarded as derogatory and has been rejected by across the world, Indian media is still, in most of the English news media, I have seen very casually using the term primitive without, even though the Indian state itself does not use the term anymore and uses the particularly vulnerable tribal group. What it does is that these stereotypes of being primitive or uncivilized hides away all the historical, our history of resistance, our presence, our assertions, our intellectual discourses. And furthermore, there are these issues are largely, a larger share of these, in my opinion, goes to the editorial rooms, because many of these, whether it is Dr. Tadvi's case or Sonbhadra, how easily Adivasis were mentioned as castes or Dalits without realizing that Adivasis are not the same as caste. And these editorial processes needs to be very diverse. And I would discuss the rest when the question answer session.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's definitely a great pleasure to be amongst friends. I want to say that I'm not here as a media person per se, but as an observer and as somebody who has interacted with media fairly. I think this report is definitely an important initiative. I do believe it's important that time and again we need to keep reflecting to the society as well as how the media is right now. It's no surprise, of course, when I saw the report, I was like, yeah, this is something that we know. There's nothing fabulously new or unique about something that we've known for so long, but nevertheless, it is definitely an important initiative. And I think it's very important primarily because it's so crucial that today media and people who work in media, it's not just about, as the report rightly mentions, it's not just about gathering information and disseminating it, it's also about molding and shaping opinion. And this opinion is vital and so important for those of us who belong to marginalized communities, because these opinions is what is going to shape how our survival is going to be. These opinions are going to matter when policies are being made with respect to our the access to healthcare, education. Pretty much it shapes everything with respect to our survival. So these opinions that media creates and molds matter, which is why it's all the more important that the media is as diverse as the society is. Thirdly, I believe that this conversation that we are having today is not, should have happened a long time ago, and it should be happening all the time, in fact. It's not something that has to happen as one of the panel discussions in a conference. It is something that all of us need to be talking all the time, because it's on our minds. It's on the minds of us, of those of us who are from marginalized communities all the time, and it should be on all of our minds as well, and all of your minds as well. Because the situation that is outside of today is very dire. It requires an urgent and an immediate response from all of us, regardless of whether we belong to the media or not, but more so for those of us who are in media, who are interacting with media, who are shaping opinions. This is a conversation that we need to be having more frequently and more intensely. Finally, I think it's not, as far as my opening remarks are concerned, finally, it is not necessarily always the emotional and the intellectual labor of those of us in the marginalized community, Dalit, Adivasi, and OBCs, who has to bring this conversation to the mainstream. It is something that the rest of you should also be part of. Essentially, what we are trying to arrive at is an anti-caste society. We are trying to arrive at a space, we are trying to arrive at a situation where all of us are anti-caste, and that reflects in the news that we report, the analysis that we do, the panels that we have, pretty much everything and anything. And that labor should not always come from those of us who are already bearing the brunt of how the society is. Thank you.
So let me start with first due apologies, Akash. The point that you make is absolutely critical, and we need to incorporate that. But let me also, just on that build, I was fairly exercised about the Supreme Court proceedings in the last few days. I'm sure many of you would know that a few months ago, the Supreme Court had actually given a verdict saying that almost 1 crore Adivasis would be evicted from their own lands. And I did not see a response, not even enough stories, except a few specific stories, and we know who are the journalists who are doing that. We did not even see any coverage of something as dramatic as this, 1 crore people getting evicted from their own homeland. And that did not happen. So the question that we are discussing of ultimately what is the narrative, what is the political, social, economic narrative that we even get to talk about, where is the agenda being set, I think these studies are going to be helpful in that. So I just want to thank News Laundry and obviously Oxfam India for taking this up. And as you said, this is obviously not surprising. We've all known this. But I still must say that when I actually looked at the numbers, it was heartbreaking. To actually see, as in if you look at the numbers seriously, just let me pick the first one. It says out of 121, 106 are upper caste, none from the Dalits or Adivasis. So it means that the remaining 14 are either from some other religions or we have not been able to identify the caste. That's the level of, I would say, complete exclusion that you see in the entire newsroom. In fact, if you remember, Dr. Ambedkar in his famous speech said that we'll create a grammar of anarchy if we do not back the political democracy that we have created with social and economic democracy. And what I see is this is really the fundamentals of that grammar of anarchy. All around us, that's what we are seeing. I work a lot with social movements, and in social movements, one of the fundamental lessons that we learn is jiski ladai, uski agwai. And that's again a principle that's something that we obviously are not talking about. So you'll again see this data. Who's talking even on Dalit question? It's essentially the upper caste. So we are obviously in a very grim situation, and I must say that the scheduled tribes in particular are further excluded, and you do not see that voice. I do work closely with the Dalit movement, closely with the Adivasi movement. Dalit movement is able to at least get some voice at the moment, but the Adivasi movement has been boxed into questions of essentially either about Naxalism, left-wing extremism, or at best forest. So that's where it's got located. And in this context, how do we really shape up? How do we pull up our socks is the critical question. And I must say, and we are all very, very critical, and rightly so, we must continue doing critical of the government. But government is still much better in its ability to ensure representation and diversity in its workforce. If you go to the private sector, and let me also say that even in what we call the civil society, you come to probably in Oxfam, we would be pretty bad in terms of our diversity. And I think the real conversation is how do we actually change this and ensure that people who shape the narrative are the ones whose issues are being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. I'll just, there are 3 points I want to make. One is a takeoff on what Cynthia talked about, which is that post-Rohit Vemula, there are scholars who described it as the third Ambedkarite wave triggered by the death of Rohit. So that, in my opinion, I mean, I was a journalist before that for many years, and suddenly, and for all those years, I struggled to report on caste. And even if I did, it was mostly about how many dead, how many raped. But after Rohit Vemula, suddenly in the woke press, I mean, there's a huge chunk of right wing. Let's leave them out. But in the woke press, there was a lot of interest. Oh, let's talk about caste. Let's write about caste and all of that. So people like me who decided that, okay, Rohit Vemula was a trigger for many of us. So I started saying openly that I'm a Dalit. So then suddenly there was this entire thing of a lot of editors and senior journalists wanted me, saying, why don't you join us? Or why don't you come as a columnist? Why don't you write opinion pieces? And all of that. saying, we want this entire perspective, this angle. But very soon I realized that what they really wanted was a boy, my boy. Okay, so my voice mediated by a Brahmin. And I shout out to the women in the room. I'm sure they've experienced this in a different context of patriarchy where, very good. We want women's voices and all that, but my baap will be some sahib somewhere, So that is one thing which is, so therefore, the question I want to flag is that of autonomy, okay, which is that if I am an expert, and this happened to me, like, a very big international publication wanted me to do this monthly column, and I pulled out when I discovered that those topics would be decided by them, the framework would be decided by them, and I am basically that fellow who's pushing the pen, So that is one thing. So the question of autonomy is a big one now. Do you want to? It's a question to the leaders in the industry. Do you want us as your, you want us to make you look good, because you can obviously talk about it everywhere, saying, oh, we have a Dalit guy. Or do you want to really, do you see us as potential leaders of newsrooms? So that's one question. The other one, of course, is this thing of, so after Rohit Vemula again, a lot of people got interested in this caste beat. Caste as a beat. Oh, you, come, write on caste issues. And, of course, we have a job for you, write on caste issues. And my thing is that what is there to write on caste issues? For me, my identity gives me a lens. It allows me to see everything through that lens, and I could be writing about cricket, I could be writing about politics, or a play I watched, and what I bring into that is that lens that I have, and therefore it is very problematic when when people come up to me and say, oh, yeah, you can cover caste for us. I said, no, I'm not that quota reporter, like this panel is a quota panel, no. So it's not like I'm not a quota reporter. I started as a district reporter, so I've covered from education to features to, train timings, air timings, all of that. But then after Rohit Vemula, somehow I got boxed into this, oh, he reports on caste. No, I reported on corruption, Yedurappa, all of that stuff. That's okay. And the wrap-up point about the charter, the Taramani Charter, it was basically inspired by this 1973 declaration that was passed in the US by the ASNE, the American Society of News Editors, who said, this is after the civil rights movement and all of that, and suddenly there was one clutch of woke editors, white men, of course, who said, let's sign this diversity charter, and they said that we will work towards including racial minorities in proportion to their population. So using this as a template, I managed to get a few senior journalists. There was Vinod from Caravan, Siddharth was there, Scroll Center representative. If I'd known Abhinandan earlier, I would have asked him also to send somebody. Dhanya Rajendran was there. And she's the only one, of course, who, with due credit to the others, she's the only one who really followed up on that charter. And today I would say that hers is one of the more diverse newsrooms in the country. So that is the Taramani Charter. What we're looking for is endorsements, more newsrooms, news organizations to come and sign that charter. Individuals too, senior journalists, all of that. And also we want to build a network of mentors, and that'll come later. You can talk to me about it later. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Sudipto. I'd like to ask Akash to say a bit more about the Adivasi Resurgence, platform. Can you say why you started it and why you felt the need to do it? What do you do with that?
Yeah, so one of the main reasons was...
I'll give you a minute to answer that. Yeah.
One of the main reasons was this, the dominance of victim narratives that I found on any news media. Like 99% of the stories about Adivasis were about how deprived they are, how marginalized and excluded
starvation
they are.
Deaths.
Yeah, but there were barely any narratives which were celebrating the assertions, the resistance movements. For example, in Attapadi, they would report about the deaths or the exclusion, but they wouldn't cover National Tribal Festival, which happened this year. So these kind of things were, we wanted to challenge these by...
So positive stories is what you're looking
at.
Also.
I mean, it's a gaze where you see a community as being meek, being powerless, while in reality that's not true. It's your gaze which is not able to see the resistance that has been going on for generations.
Okay. So what do you do with it? How do you, is it a print
So no,
platform?
it's a website, and the initial idea was that that we will get Adivasi people to write about their own communities, to report about their own stories, and so far we have over 30 Adivasi journalists who have
That's something to
published
celebrate,
with it.
certainly. Thank you. Christina, I'd like to ask you, you said something about diversity. Can you say a little more about what you mean about when you say diversity? And what are the elements that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. So I'm not very familiar with what kind of diversity initiatives are underway within media organizations, but I'm going to assume that it's relatively similar to the ones that are taking place within the corporate sector, where I feel like there's a lot of readiness and willingness to see diversity from the perspective of gender, sexual orientation, and to some extent disability as well, but not so much from the caste perspective. And I think one of the reasons for that is, backed by the report published, is that the very language of diversity and representation and inclusion is defined by those who are upper caste. Even within the woke discourse, even within woke spaces itself are dominated by upper caste people, right? So how you articulate diversity, representation, inclusion is assuming that the power lays within upper caste people, and they get to decide the terms and conditions of what inclusion is. Who gets to be part of this inclusion? Who gets to decide what role individuals from marginalized communities will play? To what purpose this inclusion will serve? And how is this going to help the organization? So all of that is being conceived, that very thing is being conceived by upper caste individuals, by the upper caste community. So that has to change.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to underscore one point that actually even Akash highlighted about the language. Even when we use the word Savarna, for instance, it's a very commonly used term nowadays. It's come into vogue recently. Also the term upper caste, which is much older. I prefer to use the word, be politically correct and say dominant castes, because they do tend to dominate, all the institutions. And also this, the term Savarna seems to underscore for me the reality of caste. So I resist using that. So that is why I say I don't like to use. I know even scholars use the term, but I'd vote for the word term dominant rather than Savarna, or certainly not upper caste. Yeah, thank you. Because you're here as the head of an institution, so we'll take you as the representation of, upper caste institutional power, and we will now ask you what you think about issues of leadership, ownership, funding, and how that shapes, the content of, the decisions of hiring, the content of media, or the choice of which movements you will choose as Oxfam, as a civil society. Can you?
Okay. So
you're also the token white, upper caste male as well. So patriarchy as well. Okay.
All right. I hopefully a comrade and a co-traveler. Yeah. So the question that you're asking is obviously central. And I'm a student of politics. And ultimately, you're looking at a thriving democracy built on the idea of diversity, inclusion, representation, and voice. Those are fundamental principles of a democratic framework. And therefore, if you're really looking at creating whether a democratic state or democratic polity or democratic institutions, we'll need to have that diversity, without which we'll not be able to thrive, particularly for institutions like ours, where we are actually looking at more of the issues of the marginalized, excluded, disempowered. I think it should be the other way around, as in we need to completely invert the pyramid. But it's not happening. And it does, in many ways, affect the choices we make, both in terms of our lack of understanding and what I think at least two of our co-panelists have said. It's also a question of gaze. The gaze of the upper caste men looking at the question of Adivasis in Chhattisgarh and in Jharkhand is going to be very different from the gaze of an Adivasi who's celebrating the 300 years of struggle, who celebrates the idea that the first freedom movement actually was in 1750 and not 1857. So those are very, very critical markers, and it completely reshapes the narrative. And what I would say is, and that's so central for any transformative movement.
So what should you be doing therefore to
so I must say that it's been fairly difficult. It's been a challenge. Many of us, as we are doing, say, a report of this kind, we are gradually looking at ensuring diversity in our boardroom to actually how we work in terms of the teams we have. But it's not been an easy journey for us. We need to be doing many, many more steps. But I just wanted to say that this becomes even more critical, just going back to your previous question, that particularly in the current political juncture, where you're looking at a consolidated Hindutva identity, I think the real voice of reason and the voice of sanity and of rights and of justice will actually come from these movements, which are at the moment at periphery, but they're the ones who can actually change this hegemony of a Hindutva narrative.
Thank you. Sudipto, I think you will very much agree with what I'm going to quote Baba Saheb Ambedkar in his comments relating to the media and of his time. And he says, and you will immediately see the relevance to today, he says it is easy to construct with the press in hand, it's easy to manufacture great men. This is, I think, a quote for the times. This was Ambedkar then, but we know how relevant he is even at this point. So in such a context, Sudipto, what do you feel we can do as media people, as people who have some voice and space within media? And I'd also like to direct part of that question to Christina, because I don't want to say too much. People know I'm a voice for Dalit women, for women in at various levels in governance and so on. But I'd like to ask you what you think is will shape the content of the output that Dalit perspective will bring. You said that it's not a beat, it's a perspective, it's a lens to analyze society. Please say a little more about that.
Okay, firstly, I just wanted to make two quick points. I mean, since there's a Baba Saheb quote, and this is, I suppose, tie up to what I said in my opening comments. So he said, when they wanted the Vedas, they called Vyasa. When they wanted the Ramayana, they called Valmiki. When they wanted the Constitution, they called me. Okay. Now, when suddenly after Rohit Vemula's pages opened up, they want Cynthia, they want Akash, they want, Christina, and all of that. So that's just a quote to tie up that thing. And also, you're using terminologies, saying you don't like to use upper caste. So one of the things I've done as long as I can remember in my career is to avoid using the term lower caste. So I use lowered caste. We are not lower. Somebody pushed us down the ladder. We are lowered caste. So that's the thing. And so what can the industry do to accommodate us? Well, the jury is out on the content. The content, I think, okay, some of the things are obvious. I mean, in terms of content, they need to have us in leadership positions and all of that. What kind of caste-related content I would like to see? There are a lot of these award-winning journalists, who are doing supposedly great work on covering caste atrocities and all, and they feel like no, they get very angry when you ask them, why can't you cede this space? They'll be like, why not? As a woman or as a feminist, I can write about Dalit issues, there's an intersection and all of that, these kind of arguments. What I would like upper caste journalists to do is to tell us what's happening in their world. We don't know what kind of conversations are happening. We don't know what kind of dinner table conversations, Pandey ji ke ghar mein kya ho raha hai, because there's so much of this, almost this colonial ethnography kind of thing. They want to come into our huts, into our neighborhoods, into our thing, find out what we eat and all of that. And, but I also want to know what they eat, what they discuss. So if the question is, if I am an upper caste person, how can I write about caste? Yes, of course you must write about caste, but write about your own communities. Tell us what your community is up to. So that is one quick point. I don't know if that answers your question.
Obviously, I think what Sudipto is not saying is that Dalit does not equate caste, right? I mean, it's not that Dalits are the only scholars of caste. We do other things too, apart from thinking and writing about caste. But more importantly about Dalit women, I think the content that's being generated about Dalit women is very stereotypical. We have gruesome videos that are being released very responsibly. Content like the suicide note of Payal Tadvi's got released. A person from a marginalized background too. And what about the privacy of women who come from marginalized communities? What happens to that? So that's a question that the media has to answer, and I believe that it has to go through a complete overhaul. Secondly, I do believe Dalit women, they have to be in the newsroom, and not just as tokens, but as people who are powerful enough to influence a way of thinking, powerful enough to make decisions in the newsroom, and powerful enough to decide what gets to be on prime time and what gets to get the spotlight. Thank you.
So I think we have a few minutes left for audience questions. So if you, we will take all the questions. There's not much time, so we'll take all the questions. Please say to whom you are addressing the question, and be very brief so that we can give more time to for the answers. Any questions? Very brief, and don't make a statement, just ask a question.
So, like Sudipto pointed out that in traditional media space, the media which is owned by upper caste people, they just want to show off their wokeness. So, my question is that, like, what's the way forward for us then? Like, should we try and create our own media like Dalit Dastak or Dalit Camera have done? Or, like, should we try and keep fighting for the space in traditional media space?
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, several have. Yes, sir. Yeah, question here. Next, you can have the mic there at the back.
Yeah, my name is Parameshwar Rao. I came from Visakhapatnam. I am too late. I am at the end now in the session. My question is, I know one of the MP, he told me 5 years back, there is no Dalit in the mainstream media. I know it is Dalit. Udit Raj told me, okay. Now I am entering to that field through Consensus, a platform called Civil, which is developed on blockchain, like in Ethereum. Then I'm encouraging most of Dalits to follow me so that there is a newsroom concept.
Is there a question, sir?
Yeah, question for you. Then, is there any leading Dalit entrepreneurs in the mainstream media or not? It is to the total panel.
Okay. Whether there's me leadership, no. That answer is very simple. Yes. The gentleman there, yes.
मेरा दो सवाल है, एक अमिताभ से और एक सुदीप्तो से। अमिताभ से ये सवाल है कि इसमें इस रिपोर्ट में कोई रिकमेंडेशन क्यों नहीं है? रिकमेंडेशन का पार्ट क्यों मिसिंग है? क्वालिटेटिव पार्ट मिसिंग है, उसके लिमिटेशंस बताए गए हैं, लेकिन रिकमेंडेशन पार्ट क्यों मिसिंग है? दूसरा सवाल सुदीप्तो से है, वो ये कि ऐसा नहीं है कि दलित्स या ओबीसीज या फिर और जो मार्जिनलाइज कम्युनिटीज़ हैं वो उस कम्युनिटीज़ से पत्रकार या जर्नलिस्ट ज्वाइन नहीं करते हैं, लेकिन वो ऊपर क्यों नहीं जा पाते हैं लीडरशिप पोजीशन पे, जबकि हम देखते हैं कि वो ट्रांजिशन दूसरी जगह होता है। और साथ ही कि रिटेंशन का सवाल, हम ये देखते हैं कि लोग ज्वाइन करते हैं लेकिन बहुत जल्दी वो छोड़ देते हैं, तो इसकी क्या वजह?
Yes sir.
This is for Amitabh. What is your main lesson? How do you interpret the main lesson which we can draw from this report? And how do you think, as he said, the recommendations following from this report, how will they feed back into your projects? How do you want to shape your projects in the light of this report? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Any others? Okay. Next you can.
My question's for Christina. I remember that at the time of when the Me Too movement had begun at the beginning of, October, at least in India here, you had written a lot about sort of what Dalit feminists and Dalit women and the representation that they found within the movement, and also about the coverage that it found. At the time, also, of course, the movement had quite a bit of upper caste sort of dominance. Would you be able to give some more comments on what you think newsrooms could do to cover that better? What should be done better in order to cover these issues? Kind of goes back a little bit to what you're talking about Dalit women in newsrooms, because that would be very interesting to hear.
Thank you.
My question is for Sudipto. Yeah, hi. You've worked in a legacy media organization and you've talked about having the lens versus the beat sort of dichotomy. Can you talk a little bit about your personal experience? No? Okay.
Maybe you'll write about it sometime so that we can all learn.
After I retire, I need a job.
Any others? Yeah.
This is for all the panelists. One, can you tell us a bit more about the Taramani Charter, and also for new digital media startups like ours, like Suno India, what would be some of the measures that we can already make, take so as to ensure better diversity and inclusion, and not just for tokenism?
Okay. So I think we've got most of the questions in. Yeah, you can start from there.
So that question about should we start our own outlets or should we try to find space it's a very difficult question to answer, right? I mean, because our own space can also mean a ghetto, which is a dangerous place to be. But our own space can also be like Roundtable India, like Vellivada, like Dalit Camera, and to borrow an example from another context, Ladies Finger, But it's a very difficult thing. Like if you were to ask me, and it's I think individual to individual, if you were to ask me, I would want to be in the mainstream. And a lot of people have a problem with what is this mainstream and all. We know what mainstream is. Legacy media. Yeah, that's where I think it's important for me to be. It's an individual thing. The other thing about Mehtab, आपने पूछा कि हमारे लोग मतलब अंदर किसी भी तरह आ जाते हैं कभी-कभी, लेकिन वो रह नहीं पाते, वो उस जगह को मतलब बना के नहीं रह पाते, एंड ऊपर चढ़ नहीं पाते वो जो कॉर्पोरेट लैडर है या फिर मीडिया लैडर जो भी है. एंड उसका जवाब मतलब हम काफ़ी बार इसको डिस्कस भी कर चुके हैं. इट्स जस्ट बेसिकली देयर इज़ अ नाइस लिटिल बडी सिस्टम ना. there are these people who people who know people who know people. उन्हीं को fellowships मिल रही हैं, उन्हीं को awards मिल रही हैं, उन्हीं को plum positions मिल रही हैं, उन्हीं को बड़ी बड़ी assignments मिल रही हैं. तो personal experience की किसी ने सवाल उठाई, तो मैं इतना कहना चाहूँगा कि I'm proud of whatever work I've done so far in journalism. Like I said, I started with working in a district. And I don't think that I'm less in any way compared to some of my contemporaries who are now editors in big places. But because suddenly I started talking about caste and things like that, I sometimes feel that people see me as dangerous. नहीं यार इसको संभाल नहीं सकते इसको, So it's a tough decision. No? Do you open your mouth or do you not open your mouth? So that's a bit of a problematic thing because you get typecast and all that. I mean, for women at least, there are many more women in the industry. There is some support system with Dalits, and in English media, we are around 12 people. And of those, many are at the starting level. So sorry, I'm going on.
मेहताब, धन्यवाद आपने ये सवाल पूछा, पर शायद आप शुरू में नहीं थे. हिमांशी ने कहा कि दिस इज़ वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस, और जैसा इन्होंने कहा कि अगले साल वो ये कोटा पैनल न रहे, अभिनंदन भी बैठे हैं, मुख्य पैनल बन जाए, प्रमुख पैनल बन जाए. आपने
Okay, I don't want this to be some center stage panel. I want to see a situation where Dalits are sitting in on discussions on the RTI, on whatever they have. So when if a manal is a problem, then a Brahmanal also is a problem, right? Right.
Okay. So I was just making a limited point that we'll come back with the recommendations, and it would be important to also center stage that. And Abhinandan, hope you're listening. Yeah. And the second question, I think we're privileged that when we do our programming, we are able to get insights from the Dalit movement, when we work with the Adivasi movement. So we are able to do that, but we are not able to, actually do serious policy advocacy because we do not have the allies that are needed. Hopefully this study will highlight that, and we'll be able to push for a greater diversity in the newsroom.
Thank you. So I think that ties back to the question the lady asked about, what diversity initiatives that, startups such as startups can come up with. I think it is a collective process. I would go back to my original point that this is not something, the onus does not lie upon people from marginalized communities to envision what diversity looks like. It is a collective process. It just have to make sure that upper caste and dominant caste don't take up the space, that it is truly a collective process. Secondly, the question about Me Too, I think the simpler answer would be to not have a selective outrage towards stories that come from upper caste / Savarna / dominant caste backgrounds. I think that outrage must very much be for Dalit women who are coming out with their stories as well. And as such, it's a very difficult space. It's a very intimidating space for Dalit women to talk about the harassment that they have faced. So it's all the more important that big media as well as startups give more coverage to what's happening, as well as having more Dalit women to write. We need more Dalit women to write. We need more women from marginalized communities to be telling their stories by themselves as against those who are appropriating our stories.
To the point that Sudipto was mentioning earlier, I think even in the situation of Adivasi communities and how underrepresented they are, the fact that till date most of the stories on Adivasis are covered by Brahmin and upper caste journalists it should be the first step to correct, and one should ask before assigning or before thinking about a story or report whether they have considered talking to an Adivasi journalist, while there are many who are writing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So we've run completely out of time, so I've just thanked the panelists and just like to thank you for being a good audience, and I hope that we will all go back with the understanding that it's not enough to have the token Dalit or woman on your staff or on your team or on your board, but it's important for us to become part of everything that's happening. And it's not just the representation or even participation, but effective leadership and voice that we need to give. It is the right, after all, in a democratic setup like India, in a republic, where the values are equality, fraternity, and what's the other one? Freedom, equality, fraternity. If we don't where can we fraternize if we don't work together? If we can't sit and eat together? I think that is the important takeaway for me at least. Thank you all for this very enlightening session.